The Dragon at the Gate Extended Edition. The northern frontier of Eldermere had not seen a dragon in nearly a century. Children still recited the old rhymes about them, half-warning, half-wonder verses passed down from grandparents who claimed their own grandparents had glimpsed wings against the sun. The elders told stories beside winter hearths of firestorms rolling down from the ashen peaks, of shadows that swallowed villages whole, of molten ruin poured from the heavens. Whether the tales had grown in the telling did not matter. Fear, once planted, needs little tending. And so the people of the frontier lived with one eye always turned toward the mountains. The ashen peaks loomed like a broken crown on the horizon, jagged, snow-dusted, and often veiled in storm. Even on clear days they carried a brooding presence as though something ancient and watchful lay coiled among their crags. Shepherds avoided grazing too close. Hunters left offerings of bone and salt at certain cairns, just in case the old powers still listened. But decades had passed without flame in the sky. Fields were planted, homes were rebuilt, the old watchtowers rotted into ruin. And Brackenfall prospered. It was a modest village, nestled where the river Dareth bent around a crescent of fertile soil. Timber houses with moss-dark roofs lined a central green. Smoke from cookfires curled lazily into the air. The clang of hammer on anvil rang steady and reassuring from the forge near the eastern gate. Life, fragile and stubborn, had taken root. On the morning the dragon came, the air carried the scent of rain. Storm clouds rolled low across the sky, swollen and bruised. The wind tugged at laundry lines and rattled shutters. Farmers worked quickly, hopping to finish before the downpour began. It was Tomas, the youngest of the gate guards, who saw it first. At first he thought it a trick of the storm, lightning caught strangely in the clouds. Then the shape moved. Not lightning. Not a cloud. A vast silhouette with wings broader than the village green. His breath caught in his throat. The shape descended, breaking through the lower cloud bank. Crimson scales caught the dim light, and for a moment the world seemed painted in blood. Dragon, Tomas screamed, voice cracking. The word tore through Brackenfall like a blade. Tools dropped, carts overturned. Mothers snatched children into their arms. Dogs howled and bolted beneath porches. Church bells began clanging wildly, though no one remembered pulling the rope. Panic rippled through the fields. The older guards reached for spears with hands that trembled despite their bravado. One man tried to notch an arrow but fumbled it into the mud. High above, the dragon's wings beat unevenly. She did not glide with the terrible majesty of legend. She labored. Each downward stroke seemed to cost her. As she descended lower, details sharpened. Her scales, once radiant like molten gold and crimson flame, were dulled with soot and streaked dark with blood. One wing membrane hung torn near the joint, ragged as a sail shredded by storm. Smoke did not curl from her nostrils. No fire flickered behind her teeth. Instead, she made a sound that none of them expected. It was not a roar. It was a cry. Low, resonant, and filled with something so raw it stilled even the bells. In her foreclaws, cradled with astonishing care, was a small dragon cub. Barely the size of a large hound. Its silver scales, meant to gleam like moonlight, were dimmed and smeared with grime. Its head lolled weakly against her talons. One small wing twitched in feeble spasms. The mother dragon circled once over the outskirts of Brackenfall, not hunting, not searching. Seeking. And then she descended toward the eastern gate. Villagers fled before her shadow, doors slammed, barrels toppled. The guards abandoned their posts without shame, scattering like startled deer. All except one man's. Rowan Thorne had been standing at his forge when the cry first reached him. He had paused mid-strike, hammer raised above glowing iron. The sound vibrated through the air, through the anvil, through his bones. Not rage. Grief. He stepped outside as others ran past him. Rowan, someone shouted, "Get inside." But he did not move toward shelter. He moved toward the gates. He was not a warrior, not a knight, not a hero from ballads. He was a blacksmith. Broad-shouldered from years of labor, hair threaded with early gray, face weathered by heat and wind. A leather apron hung heavy across his chest, marked with old burns and oil stains. His hands were scarred, thick-knuckled, capable of shaping stubborn iron into plowshares and hinges and horseshoes. He held no spear, no sword, only himself. The ground trembled as the dragon landed before him. The impact cracked paving stones and sent a gust of wind blasting outward. Dust swirled. Rain began to fall in scattered drops, hissing against warm scale. Rowan did not run. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break his ribs, but he planted his boots and forced himself to breathe. The dragon loomed over him, vast as a chapel. Her horns curved back like blackened scimitars. A ridge of spines ran down her neck and along her spine. One eye amber ancient, vast as a shield fixed upon him. He expected fury. He expected heat. He expected death. Instead, her great horned head lowered. Slowly, carefully, until her snout hovered only a few paces away. Her eye blinked, and Rowan saw it clearly. Tears, not the metaphor of poets. Actual tears, thick and shimmering, tracking down scaled cheeks and dripping to the stones below. She shifted her foreclaws forward, gently, with more delicacy than any creature of such size should possess. And she placed the cub at Rowan's feet. The small dragon made a faint, broken sound. Rowan's breath caught. A low rumble rolled from the mother's throat, not a threat, not a warning. A plea. It vibrated through the ground, through Rowan's boots into his marrow. He swallowed. Every tale he had ever heard told him this was madness. Dragons were sovereign beings, untouchable, proud beyond measure. They raised kingdoms rather than bend the knee. They did not beg. Yet this one did. Her head lowered further until her jaw brushed the stone. One massive wing sagged protectively but did not shield the cub from him. Trust. Terrible, fragile trust. Rain began to fall in earnest now, streaking soot and blood along her scales. Rowan forced his gaze from the enormity of her and down to the small body before him. The cub's chest fluttered faintly. Too faintly. He knelt. Behind him, from cracks in shutters and narrow windows, villagers watched in stunned silence. Rowan's knees hit the wet stone. Up close, the cub looked even smaller. Its silver scales were soft-edged, not yet hardened to the gleam of adulthood. One tiny claw twitched weakly against the ground. Then Rowan saw it. A blackened shard of iron protruded from the cub's side, lodged between scales near the ribs. Jagged, barbed, cruel, not an arrow meant for hunting deer. A weapon meant for wars. The metal was dark, treated, and hardened. Even without touching it, Rowan recognized the craftsmanship. He had seen it before. He had forged similar shapes years ago under contract, before he understood where they would be used. War steel from the southern warbands. His jaw tightened. The shard had pierced scale and embedded deep. Around it, the flesh was swollen and darkened. The wound oozed sluggishly, dragon blood shimmering faintly like molten silver. Poison, perhaps, or simply iron itself. He knew enough of old lore to remember. Iron burned creatures of magic in ways ordinary steel did not. The cub's breathing hitched. The mother dragon made another sound, quieter now, strained. Rowan glanced up. Her eye was fixed not on him but on her child. Fear. A mother's fear. The same fear he had once seen reflected in polished metal when fever had taken his wife. The same helplessness. He exhaled slowly. I can try, he murmured, though he knew she did not understand his words. Or perhaps she understood more than he guessed. Carefully, he reached a hand toward the shard. The mother's head lifted a fraction. Rowan froze. Her nostrils flared. A thin thread of smoke escaped, but not flame. After a long, suspended heartbeat, she lowered her head again. Permission. Rowan's calloused fingers hovered over the iron but did not yet touch it. Heat radiated faintly from the cub's body, not burning but warm like banked embers. He leaned closer, studying the angle of entry, the depth. It would have to be removed cleanly. Quickly, but not here. Rainwater mixed with blood on the stones. The open air invited infection. He would need tools, fire, oil, cloth. His forge. He looked up again at the dragons. Her massive eye met his. He gestured toward the workshop behind him, then toward the cub. I must take him inside, he said softly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the dragon shifted. She drew back just enough to give him space. Her claws scraped against stone as she repositioned, making a clear path between the gate and the forge. Trusting him. Trusting a human. The weight of it pressed against Rowan's chest heavier than any hammer. He slid his arms carefully beneath the cub. The scales were smoother than he expected, warm and faintly humming with latent energy. The cub let out a weak whimper but did not resist. It was heavier than it looked. He grunted slightly as he lifted it. The mother dragon's head followed every movement. Rowan stood slowly, cradling the injured creature against his chest as one might carry a wounded child. The village was silent but for Rain. No one moved. No one breathed. Step by deliberate step, Rowan turned toward his forge. The dragon rose as well. She did not spread her wings in threat. She simply followed. Her vast body curled around the exterior of the forge as Rowan pushed the door open with his shoulder and carried the cub inside. Before stepping fully through, he paused and looked back once. The dragon lowered her head to the ground outside the doorway. Not blocking him. Not commanding. Waiting. Rowan stepped into the dim warmth of his workshop. He laid the cub gently upon the heavy oak worktable where he usually shaped iron. For the first time in his life, he was grateful the surface had been scrubbed clean the night before. The cub's breathing rattled. The iron shard glinted darkly. Rowan moved quickly now. He crossed to the forge and began shoveling in coal with practiced efficiency. Sparks leapt as he pumped the bellows. Flame roared to life, painting the walls in orange light. He gathered clean cloth from a chest near the wall, reached for oils infused with mountain herbs, the old healer's blend he still kept, though he rarely used it. Behind him, the cub made a faint, pained noise. Outside, the dragon answered with a low, keening sound that made the rafters tremble. Rowan's hands steadied. He had failed once before when someone he loved lay dying. He would not fail again. He approached the table. The shard had to come out. And in that moment, standing between fire and storm, between dragon and village, Rowan Thorne made a choice that would be remembered long after both man and dragon had turned to dust. He reached for his tools. The Forge of Mercy Extended Edition. Rowan carried the cub into his workshop, while the mother dragon curled around the building like a living fortress. From the outside, the forge was little more than thick timber beams, stone foundation, and a broad chimney of dark brick that had withstood decades of heat. It had survived winter gales, river floods, and the slow gnaw of time. It had never been tested by a dragon. Now its walls creaked under the shadow of something vast and ancient. The mother dragon settled with deliberate care, folding her wounded wing close to her body despite the tremor that rippled along its torn membrane. Her coils encircled the structure, scales scraping stone and wood with a grinding rumble. Her tail curved around the rear of the forge like a barricade. Her head lowered near the doorway, one great amber eye fixed unblinking upon the threshold. None dared approach. Villagers peered from cracks in shutters and from behind overturned carts. Some clutched charms of bone and iron. Others whispered prayers to distant gods who had not answered in 100 years. A few wept openly, certain that whatever happened next would end in flame. But there was no flame. Only waitings. Inside, Rowan laid the cub upon his heavy oak worktable, clearing aside tongs, chisels, and a half-shaped plowhead in a single sweep of his forearm. The table bore old scorch marks and dents from years of labor. Now it held something infinitely more fragile than iron. The forge behind him roared to life as he fed it coal with swift, practiced movements. The bellows wheezed and exhaled, coaxing flame into bright, hungry bloom. Heat filled the room, chasing dampness from the storm-soaked air. Rowan worked with the precision of a master craftsman. But his hands trembled. Not from fear of the dragon outside, though the knowledge of her presence pressed against him like a mountain. They trembled because of the fragile life before him. Up close, the cub seemed impossibly young. Its silver scales shimmered faintly even in weakness, like moonlight struggling through clouds. Its eyes were closed, thin membranes flickering beneath the lids as though it dreamed troubled dreams. Each breath rattled shallowly, catching as pain lanced through its small body. Dragon blood shimmered like liquid starlight. It pooled slowly around the blackened shard lodged in its side, dripping onto the iron-banded edge of the table. Where it touched metal, it hissed softly, not in fury but in protest. Steam curled upward in thin tendrils, carrying a scent unlike anything Rowan had known, sharp as ozone, sweet as crushed pine, edged with something ancient and wild. The blood did not burn him. When it brushed his fingers, it felt warm, alive, a pulse beneath the skin. The shard had to be removed cleanly. Rowan leaned closer, studying the wound. The iron had pierced between developing scales, driving deep at an upward angle. Whoever had forged it had designed it to tear upon withdrawal. Barbs flared outward just beneath the visible edge, promising devastation if removed carelessly. He recognized the patterns. He had once forged similar heads in his youth, when coin had mattered more than conscience. The southern warbands paid well for weapons designed not merely to kill, but to maim, to cripple beasts larger than horses, to bring giants to their knees. He had told himself then that metal was neutral, that a blacksmith shaped tools, and what others did with them lay beyond his responsibility. Now that same philosophy lay embedded in a dragon child. His jaw tightened. Outside, a low rumble rolled across the forge roof as the mother shifted. Her shadow blotted the windows entirely. Only slivers of gray light filtered through cracks in the wood. The cub whimpered. It was a small sound, but it carried. The mother answered with an anguished cry that echoed across the valley. The sound reverberated through the forge walls, rattling tools on their hooks. Somewhere in the village, a child screamed in terror. Church bells, long since abandoned, swayed in the wind without ringing. Rowan placed one steady hand upon the cub's neck, just below the jawline. "It's all right," he murmured, voice low and even. "You're not alone." He did not know whether dragons understood human speech, but tone, at least, was universal. The cub's breathing steadied slightly beneath his touch. Rowan turned to his shelves. He gathered clean linen cloth, the best he possessed. He reached for a small wooden box carved with mountain sigils. Inside were herbs dried and bundled years ago by the village healer before her passing. Arnleaf for infection, bitterroot to dull pain, ghost mint to calm fever. He crushed the leaves in a mortar with swift efficiency, mixing them with warmed oil until the scent rose sharp and medicinal. He set a slender pair of tongs into the forge flame. Not to wound, to cleanse. The iron glowed dull red, then brightened toward orange. He withdrew it carefully and plunged it into the herb-infused oil. Steam burst upward in a fragrant cloud. He repeated the process with a narrow-bladed knife and a hooked probe. Hours seemed to stretch and compress at once. Rain battered the roofs. Thunder rolled over the ashen peaks. The mother dragon did not move from her vigil. Rowan wiped sweat from his brow with his forearm, leaving a streak of soot across his temple. He remembered another night years ago, another room thick with heat and fear, his wife lying pale and trembling beneath blankets, the healer whispering that the fever would pass, though doubt clouded her eyes. Rowan had stood helpless then. Strong hands that could bend iron had been useless against unseen sickness. He had held her as her breathing slowed. He had felt power drain from his life in increments too subtle to fight. Powerlessness had carved something hollow inside him that never fully filled again. He refused to feel that hollow now. He leaned close to the cub's wound. First, he cleaned away the pooled blood gently, revealing more of the embedded shard. The barbs were worse than he had feared. They had torn internal tissue upon entry. Removing them would reopen everything. One clean pull, he murmured to himself. But not yet. He slid the hooked probe carefully along the wound's edge, widening the opening slightly, just enough to ease the barb's path. The cub flinched even in unconsciousness, a small shudder rippling along its spine. Outside, the mother's claws dug into stone with a grinding scrape. Rowan paused. He stepped toward the doorway. The massive amber eye fixed upon him instantly. He held up his blood-streaked hands. "I must hurt him," he said quietly, "to save him." The dragon's pupil narrowed to a thin slit. For a long, suspended moment, Rowan felt as though the weight of an entire mountain pressed against his chest. Then slowly, the dragon lowered her head again to the earth. "Trust." He returned to the table. He wrapped cloth firmly around the cub's torso to brace it, positioned himself for leverage, braced one knee against the table leg. He inhaled deeply. With steady breath, he grasped the shard. It was still cold despite the warmth of dragon blood. Iron did not belong in such flesh. He could feel its wrongness beneath his fingers. "One clean pull," he whispered. He pulled. The resistance was immediate and brutal. Barbs caught and tore. The cub's body arched violently, jaws snapping open in a shriek that shattered the air. The sound was high and piercing and filled with pure agony. Outside, the mother dragon roared. The sound cracked stones and sent birds scattering for miles. Windows shattered across Brackenfall. Several villagers dropped to their knees, convinced the end had come. The river itself seemed to tremble. Rowan did not falter. He tightened his grip and pulled harder, angling carefully to minimize tearing. The shard came free in a sudden, sickening release. Blood surged. Bright, shimmering. Rowan flung the iron aside. It clattered against the far wall and left a smoking dent where it struck. He pressed clean cloth hard against the wound, applying pressure to stem the flow. "Stay with me," he muttered. The cub's shriek faded into weak gasps. Outside, the roar tapered into a raw, broken sound. Rowan reached for the heated blade. It glowed bright orange. He hesitated only a fraction of a second. Then he pressed heated steel to scale and flesh to seal the wound. Smoke rose instantly, thick and acrid. The scent of scorched scale filled the forge, sharp, bitter, unforgettable. The cub convulsed once more, claws raking grooves into the oak table. Rowan held firm, counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. He withdrew the blade. The bleeding slowed to a sluggish seep. He quickly applied the herb mixture, packing it carefully along the cauterized edges. Wrapped the torso tightly with linen strips, binding them snug but not restrictive. The cub lay still. Too still. For a heartbeat, dread clawed at Rowan's chest. Then, a breath. Slow, deep, another. The rattling eased. The faint glow beneath the silver scales brightened just slightly, like embers stirred by wind. Outside, the mother dragon fell silent. Utterly silent. Even the storm seemed to hush. Rowan stepped back slowly, hands trembling now that the work was done. Sweat poured down his spine. Soot streaked his arms. Dragon blood dried in iridescent smears across his skin. He sagged against the stone wall, sliding down until he sat heavily upon the floor. For a long moment, he simply breathed. The forge fire crackled. Rain tapped against the roof. The cub's breathing continued, steady now, not strong but no longer fatting. A massive shape shifted at the doorway. Timbers groaned. The doorframe splintered as something immense pressed gently against it. Moments later, the great horned head of the mother dragon pushed through the shattered doorway. Wood cracked and fell aside, but she moved with surprising care, avoiding crushing the interior more than necessary. Her eye filled the room, luminous and searching. It fixed on the table. On her child. The cub stirred. A small, weak chirrup escaped its throat. Its eyes fluttered open, clouded at first, then focusing. They were not silver like its scales. They were pale gold. They found her. The mother dragon exhaled a trembling breath that stirred ash across the forge floor. She extended her snout carefully toward the table. Rowan rose unsteadily to give her space. Her nose brushed the cub's forehead. The cub answered with a faint nuzzle. And for the first time since she had descended from the mountains, the mother dragon stopped crying. No tears fell from her ancient eyes. Instead, something else flickered there. Relief, so profound it seemed to reshape the air itself. Rowan stood a few paces away, chest rising and falling slowly. He had pulled iron from dragon flesh. He had sealed a wound that might have ended a life older than kingdoms yet to be born. He had chosen mercy over fear. Outside, the villagers watched as the storm began to break. Clouds parted slightly above Brackenfall. A thin beam of late afternoon light pierced through, glinting off crimson scales wrapped protectively around a humble forge. Within those walls, amid smoke and sweat and the lingering scent of scorched scale, something fragile and extraordinary had taken root. Not domination, not conquest, but trust. And in the quiet that followed agony, in the steady breath of a healing dragon cub, Rowan Thorne understood something he had not since the day he lost his wife. Power was not always in the hammer. Sometimes, it was in the hands that chose not to strike. Dawn came slowly to Brackenfall. The storm had exhausted itself in the night, leaving the world washed clean and strangely hushed. Mist clung low over the river Dareth, winding pale and ghost-like through the fields. Broken shutters hung crooked. A few roof tiles lay shattered in the streets where the dragon's roar had cracked them loose. But there were no ashes. No blackened beams. No smoldering ruin. For a long while after sunrise, no one dared step outside. The villagers waited in silence, listening for the telltale crackle of flame, for the thunder of wings, for the scream of something burning. They heard none of it. Instead, they heard birds. Tentative at first, one sparrow, then another. A distant crow, the soft rustle of wind through soaked grain. At last, old Marta, who had survived more winters than anyone else in Brackenfall, pushed open her door. She stepped into the street with slow, deliberate care. Her eyes lifted toward the eastern edge of the village, toward the forge. Others followed her example, doors creaked open, faces appeared in windows. Children were pulled back by cautious hands, but curiosity proved stronger than fear. They expected ashes. They expected ruin. Instead, they found something no song had ever prepared them for. The mother dragon stood before Rowan's forge, wings folded neatly against her vast body. In the pale light of morning, her scales no longer seemed merely crimson. They shimmered with deep hues of garnet and ember, catching the sun in facets like living gemstones. The torn membrane of her wing hung slack but no longer bled freely. She had tended her own wound in the night. Curled protectively against her foreleg lay her cub. The small dragon was awake. Weak, yes, its movements were slow, cautious. Linen wrappings encircled its midsection, already darkened by dried blood and herbs, but its silver scales glowed faintly once more, like moonlight returned after an eclipse. Its breathing was steady. Alive. Before them, standing perhaps 10 paces from that immense creature, was Rowan Thorn. He looked smaller in the daylight. Soot still streaked his arms and jaw. His leather apron bore stiff stains of dragon blood. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion, and his eyes were rimmed red from a sleepless night. But he did not look afraid. He stood with feet planted firmly in the dirt, hands relaxed at his sides. For a long moment, dragon and man simply regarded one another. The air between them seemed taut, like a bowstring drawn but not yet released. No one moved. No one spoke. The villagers held their breaths. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. The cub shifted slightly, lifting its small head. Its pale golden eyes blinked slowly in the morning light. It made a soft churring sound, curious, uncertain. The mother dragon lowered her gaze to her child, then lifted it back to Rowan. In that ancient amber eye, something profound flickered. Recognition. Not as prey. Not as enemy. As something else entirely. Then the impossible happened. The dragon bowed. It was not sudden. It was not a dramatic sweep of motion meant to intimidate. It was slow. Deliberate. Her massive neck curved downward. Her horned head lowered until her snout nearly touched the earth before Rowan's boots. The gesture was unmistakable. Not the lowering of a predator preparing to strike. Not submission born of defeat. But the bow of one sovereign acknowledging another. Gasps spread through the villagers like ripples across water. A few dropped to their knees instinctively, unsure whether the gesture required them to follow suit. Dragons did not bow. Dragons demanded tribute. Dragons took. They did not acknowledge humans as equals. Yet here in the damp soil of Brackenfall, before a soot-streaked blacksmith, one of the oldest creatures in Eldermere bent her head. Rowan did not fully understand what compelled him next. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was simple courtesy. He inclined his head in return. Not deeply, not theatrically, but enough. A mutual recognition. The dragon straightened slowly. She shifted her weight, lifting one massive foreclaw. For a heartbeat, fear sparked again among the villagers. Some flinched, expecting sudden violence. Instead, she reached toward her own chest. With careful precision, she drew one claw along the overlapping scales just below her throat. A single scale loosened. It fell into her grasp, detached cleanly without blood. She extended her claw toward Rowan. The scale was enormous compared to any shield he had ever crafted, broad as his chest, thick as layered plate. Its surface shimmered with deep crimson light, veins of molten gold pooling faintly beneath. Even from several paces away, Rowan could feel its warmth. Not heat that burned. Heat that lived. She placed it gently at his feet. The ground trembled as it settled into the dirt. A gift, but more than that. A pact. A promise. The villagers stared in stunned silence. Some wept openly now, not from terror, but from the sheer impossibility of what they witnessed. Rowan stepped forward slowly. He crouched before the scale. Up close, its surface reflected his face in distorted crimson hues. When he extended a tentative hand and touched it, warmth spread through his palm and up his arm, not painful but powerful. Alive. As his skin made contact, something shifted. The world narrowed. The morning sounds faded. And a presence entered his mind. It was not a voice as humans understood voices. There were no words formed in any language he knew. Instead, there was meaning. Vast, ancient, layered with memory older than kingdoms. He felt mountains beneath wings, felt centuries of sky and storm, felt grief when her child had fallen from the air under a rain of iron-tipped spears, felt fury at men who hunted what they feared. And then, he felt gratitude, debt remembered, fire withheld, sky allied. The concepts were clear, unshakable. Rowan understood. The scale was not merely payment. It was a bond. As long as it remained in his keeping, her fire would never fall upon Brackenfall. As long as he lived, the sky above this valley would not be their enemy. The connection faded gently, like a tide receding. Sound returned. The murmur of villagers. The distant rush of the river. Rowan remained kneeling for a moment, absorbing the weight of what had passed. When he rose, he did so slowly, hands still resting on the scale. The dragon regarded him one final time. The cub stirred again and attempted to stand. Its legs wobbled but held. It took 2 uncertain steps before leaning heavily against its mother's foreleg. The mother nudged it encouragingly. Then she shifted her stance. Her wings unfolded. The movement was immense and breathtaking. Membranes stretched wide, catching the rising sun so that they glowed like stained glass lit from within. The torn edge of one wing fluttered in the morning breeze, but strength had returned to her posture. Wind thundered outward as she beat her wings once. Dust swirled through the village square, cloaks snapped, children clung to door frames. She lowered her head and carefully gathered her cub in her foreclaws. The young dragon chirped softly, curling instinctively against her chest. For a final heartbeat, her gaze locked with Rowan. There was no threat in it. No hungers. Only acknowledgments. Then she leapt. The force of her ascent cracked remaining loose tiles and sent a shockwave through the ground. With 2 powerful beats of her wings, she rose above the rooftops. With 3 more, she cleared the tree line beyond the fields. She did not unleash flame. She did not scorch the earth. She climbed steadily into the brightening sky, her crimson form shrinking against the vast blue. Higher, higher still, until she and her cub vanished into the clouds, drifting toward the ashen peaks. Silence lingered long after she disappeared. The villagers stood motionless. Then slowly, as if waking from a dream, sound returned to Brackenfall. Whispers, laughter edged with disbelief. Sobs of relief. Someone began clapping weakly, others joined hesitantly. Before long, the entire square filled with voices. But Rowan remained apart, one hand resting on the crimson scale. He felt no triumphs, no pride, only quiet certainty. He had chosen compassion when fear would have been easier. That was all. Years passed. The scale was mounted above the forge door, not as a trophy but as a symbol. Its warmth never faded. In winter, it radiated gentle heat. In summer, it pulsed faintly at sunset. Travelers who saw it whispered of impossible things. Some laughed. Others crossed themselves. But none dared test its meaning. Until the southern warbands came. They marched beneath black banners, iron helms glinting in the sun. Their ranks stretched across the fields like a dark tide. They had conquered 3 smaller settlements already. Word of Brackenfall's prosperity had reached them. They expected easy conquest. A modest village. No standing army. Only farmers and craftsmen. They did not know the sky remembered. Rowan stood at the eastern edge of the village once more, older now, more gray in his beard, more lines at the corners of his eyes. He wore no armors. Held no sword. Only a hammer at his belt. Behind him, villagers gathered with pitchforks and bows, not enough to withstand trained soldiers. The warband commander rode forward, smirking beneath his helm. "Lay down your tools," he called. "Submit, and we may leave some of you alive." Rowan said nothing. He simply lifted his gaze to the sky. The day was clear. Cloudless. For a moment, doubt flickered among the villagers. Then, a shadow crossed the sun. 1 became 2. 2 became 10. The sky split with crimson flame. Dragons descended not in wrathful chaos but in disciplined formation. Their wings beat in unison, Their roars shook the courage from hardened soldiers. At their forefront flew a massive crimson form with a familiar tear in one wing membrane. Beside her flew a silver dragon, larger now, strong and gleaming in full-grown majesty. The warbands faltered. Panic shattered their ranks. Flame fell not upon the village, upon the invaders. Armor melted. Siege engines burned before they could be assembled. Those who fled were allowed to flee. Those who raised weapons found them reduced to slag. And at the center of it all stood Rowan Thorn, the blacksmith who had once knelt before a dying cub and chosen mercy. The crimson dragon swept low once as the battle ended. Her great head dipped toward him mid-flight in unmistakable acknowledgement. Then she rose again, wheeling back toward the mountains with her kin. When silence returned to the valley, Brackenfall still stood. Unburned. Unbroken. In the years that followed, bards traveled far and wide, carrying tales of what had happened there. In taverns and courts across Eldermere, they sang not of destruction, but of alliance. They sang of a dragon who bowed, of a human who did not run, of a scale that bound sky and soil in mutual respect. And they told it not as the night a dragon came to destroy, but as the dawn when humanity proved itself worthy of awe.